London, 1858. The city stood as the beating heart of the British Empire, a colossus of industry, finance, and ambition. Its population had surged past 3 million, more than doubling in a century, and the streets buzzed with life. Yet, behind the grandeur of Parliament, the booming factories, and the elegant townhouses, there lurked a horror so overwhelming that it would bring the city itself to its knees. That horror had a name whispered in disgust: the Great Stink. The story begins with the Thames. Once revered as a source of life, it had become a liquid graveyard, an open sewer coursing through the heart of London. Every waste product of humanity and industry excrement, slaughterhouse blood, rotting animal carcasses, industrial runoff flowed directly into the river. What had been the pride of the city was now a living cesspit, thick, black, and choking with decay. By the middle of the 19th century, cesspits beneath houses overflowed daily. The wealthiest Londoners had indoor plumbing, but every flush simply carried their waste straight into the Thames. The poor emptied chamber pots into the streets, where rain washed filth into open drains and eventually the river. Human refuse mingled with industrial poison until the water became unrecognizable as water at all. The stench was not a smell but an assault, a suffocating presence that clung to clothes, to hair, to the very walls of buildings. Writers of the time described the river as a ribbon of black slime and a grave of all living things. Fish had long since died out. Even the river's surface seemed alive, bubbling with noxious gases that hissed like whispers of disease. But the people of London endured it at first. Smell, after all, could be ignored. Handkerchiefs soaked in lavender water, bunches of herbs hung by windows, burning lime and incense, these were the weapons against the invisible tide. The upper classes closed their shutters, the poor suffered in silence. The river stank, but life went on, until death began to strike. For years, London had suffered waves of cholera, typhoid, and dysentery diseases spread not by bad air as most believed, but by contaminated water. But the science of the time had not yet grasped germ theory. To most Victorians, it was the smell of the miasma that carried death. In the cholera epidemic of 1848–49, more than 14,000 Londoners perished. Another outbreak in 1850 killed 10,000 more. The poor died in droves, their cramped housing and shared pumps making them perfect victims. And yet Parliament debated endlessly, unable or unwilling to act. Reform was costly, and few wanted to shoulder the burden. It was in 1858, however, that the crisis reached its terrible climax. The summer was unusually hot, brutally, suffocatingly hot. The sun beat down on the sluggish waters of the Thames, cooking its fetid contents, amplifying the stench until the city seemed swallowed by it. The stink rose like a monster, rolling through every street, seeping through every wall. No one could escape it. In Westminster, the heart of government itself, the smell invaded the very chambers of Parliament. Politicians gagged, pressed perfumed rags to their faces, and fled meetings unable to endure the air. Curtains soaked in chloride of lime were hung across windows, in a desperate attempt to keep the odor out. But nothing worked. The Great Stink had finally stormed the citadel of power. One member of Parliament declared, "We are forced to meet in a stench. That is unbearable. We may well one day be struck down by the very plague we allowed to flow beneath our feet." The press was merciless. Newspapers mocked the government's paralysis, noting that MPs were more motivated by their own discomfort than by the deaths of thousands in the slums. The Times thundered. Parliament was all but compelled to legislate upon the great London nuisance by the force of sheer stench. And yet, in a grim twist of irony, this was precisely what it took for reform to begin. The crisis demanded a savior, and his name was Joseph Bazalgette. Bazalgette was not a politician, but an engineer, a man obsessed with precision, planning, and vision. As chief engineer of the Metropolitan Board of Works, he had long argued for a massive project to construct a new sewer system that would intercept waste before it reached the Thames and carry it safely downstream. His plan was audacious, unprecedented, and ruinously expensive. But now, with Parliament suffocating in its own filth, the city was ready to listen. The Great Stink had transformed what was once dismissed as a costly dream into a matter of survival. The government passed legislation in record time, granting Bazalgette the authority and funds to act. What followed would be one of the greatest feats of Victorian engineering, the creation of over 1,300 miles of sewers, vast pumping stations, and embankments that reshaped the very geography of London. It would take years, but the system would ultimately save millions of lives and set the model for modern sanitation. Worldwide, yet in 1858, that salvation was still only a plan. For the people of London, the summer remained a living nightmare. Imagine walking the streets, the air clinging heavy in your lungs, each breath carrying the taste of rot. Flies swarmed in clouds, breeding in the muck, carrying disease from waste to food. The river at low tide was a vast plain of slime and refuse, stretching from bank to bank. Bargemen gagged as they worked. Riverside businesses closed their doors. The very heart of the empire stank of death. Travelers who arrived in London rode home in horror. One visitor declared, "The smell is so foul, I fear it shall remain in my clothes forever." Another wrote, "London is a palace of kings, yet it reeks like a corpse." The river had become a mirror of society itself, wealth and poverty, power and neglect, flowing together into corruption and decay. The great stink of 1858 was more than just a nuisance. It was a reckoning. A city that ruled the world could not even control its own filth. And in that failure lay the threat of collapse, of disease, of death on a scale no empire could ignore. As the summer dragged on, the question haunted every Londoner: would the city choke itself to death before salvation arrived?